Morning, everybody. It's been fun figuring out how to film and record. It's kind of challenging. I'm not as good at it as I thought I would be, so I overestimated my abilities, but it's been fun, messing around with it. And I'm happy, and I hope y'all have enjoyed seeing the videos I've posted on Facebook. It's been fun making them, and I thought it'd just be a good idea because, us young people are always on our phones, so I figured if they're going to be on their phones, they might as well be listening to something somewhat good. So I hope you've enjoyed that. We've reached the point in the Sermon on the Mount where so far we have been challenged, very rightfully so, but we've been challenged very heavily by Jesus in the Beatitudes, which is obviously, of course, a blessing, but also it is Jesus talking to his disciples and telling them the true ways to live like him and to what his disciples and followers, how they're supposed to live and operate in their lives. And so we've been challenged to live that way, and we've also been challenged to be the salt and the light, where obviously salt changes what it's put on and brings flavor to the earth, and light drives out the darkness. And so light and dark cannot coexist. So we've been challenged in this way. We've been challenged to love our enemies and pray for our enemies, and that is hard in its own regard. And so we've been challenged in all of these ways, and now we kind of get a breath of fresh air. We get a reminder that God is always in control, and God knows what we need, and God knows us, and God cares about us, and that is why Jesus is saying not to worry. And let's take a moment to think about who is actually speaking. I've made a point to try to understand who the audience is, where they're coming from, who they are, but let's take a moment to remember that this is not Paul talking, this isn't a disciple, this isn't like the Timothy, this isn't anybody, this is God himself, God in the flesh, speaking to us, telling us not to worry. And that, obviously we all know this is Sermon on the Mount is Jesus, and we just automatically know that. But let's take a moment to really consider what that truly means, that God himself is telling us not to worry. And that is where we will pick up in Matthew 6, starting in verse 25, where it says, "Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? So why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, and yet I say to you that even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Now if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For after all these things the Gentiles seek, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first the kingdom of God, and seek his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." So we see in the very first verse in 25 here, one of the first things out of Jesus' mouth is to not worry. And he's telling us not to worry about these things that are tangible items and are temporary satisfactions, and they are temporary feelings. Even though they are necessities, it is still temporary. And so Jesus himself is telling us this. And like I mentioned, these things don't permanently satisfy, right? When you eat, you're going to be hungry again, and when you drink, you're going to be thirsty again. And so we see this, and we know that these are not the things we should seek because they don't last forever. They will go away eventually, right? Like I said, once you eat something, you're going to want to eat again. Once you drink water, you're going to want more water eventually. And clothes even, right? There's not one pair of clothing or one type of clothing that satisfies or does what it needs to do for every single season, right? When you put on a jacket, you're going to want to take that jacket off in the summer. When you have on shorts and short sleeves, you don't want to wear that in the winter. There's not one piece of clothing that can do everything. And so this is why Jesus is telling us not to seek after these things and these items, because they don't permanently take care of you and permanently take care of what you need, like God will permanently take care of us. And then Jesus goes on to say in verse 26 to look at the birds. And these birds, they don't work tirelessly, they don't worry about their lives, they don't worry about what they're going to do or what they're going to eat. They just kind of go day by day. And, I don't really know what's inside the brain of a bird necessarily, but I'm assuming they just kind of fly around and they go day by day, not worrying about that much, and they just do what they need to do. They build their nests, they get their worms, they take care of their eggs and all of that, and they do all of this, and they don't even know God. They're birds. They don't have, like a real soul, and they don't know that there is a Father in heaven that is providing for them, and yet God still provides for them. And so that's kind of, you can think about that in our modern day world. There are people who don't believe in God or don't know about the existence of God, and God still does things for them without them even realizing it. And like I mentioned, the birds don't sow and reap. They don't do all this work. They don't gather stuff into barns. They don't do all of these things that us as humans do, and God still takes care of them, and God still provides for them. And so knowing all of this, then Jesus asked this interesting question, and this hypothetical question of, are we not more valuable than birds? And obviously we all know the answer to this is, of course we're more valuable than birds. Like I said, they don't have like souls. They're just birds, and they fly around, and we look at them and we don't really think twice about them. But Jesus is using this as an example to make the point of, are we not more valuable than them? They are fed, they're taken care of, they have a nest to live in, they have environments, they get food, they have all these things that they need, and God provides all of these things that they need, and we are more valuable than them. So how much more is God going to take care of us? And he makes the point, Jesus does, of saying us as humans should not worry about food, because God takes care of birds who don't know about God, who don't work tirelessly and don't do all this, put in all this effort to get this food, and God still provides for them. So we have to remember this and know that God himself is saying that we are more valuable, right? Obviously, that goes back to the garden. God told Adam to name all of the creatures in the land, and so that from day one we see, or from the beginning, we see that us as humans have authority over animals. They're just animals, right? And so even though all of this is true, God still provides for the birds that do not work tirelessly. And then Jesus goes on to say in verse 27, kind of what good does worrying do? Because he says, which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? So worrying does not fulfill what you're worried about. If you're worried, like the actual emotion of worrying does not take care of what you're worried about. If you're hungry and you're worried about food, being worried about food is not going to make you full. Or being worried about water is not going to make you not thirsty. Being worried about clothes is not going to keep you warm or cool off. Worrying does not do you any good, right? He uses the example of adding 1 cubit to your stature. I think a cubit, what I saw, is about 18 inches. It's like the length of your forearm. And so which of us can worry about being taller and become taller? Obviously, it's impossible. And I've not done one in a few weeks, so I thought it'd be okay to do it. There's an Andy Griffith episode where Barney, let's start in the beginning. So Barney, it's his 5th anniversary of being sworn in to the deputy sheriff's office, and they're having a celebration for him or whatever, and Andy is late to the celebration because he does not, because there's this meeting and he has to go to it, and he's there and he's sitting down with the guy who's in charge, and he tells him that they're changing the qualifications to become a deputy, and you have to be, I forgot the exact height and weight, but you have to be somewhat tall, or this height, and you have to be this weight. And Barney, if y'all know Barney, he's neither of them. He's short and he's real thin, and so Andy finds out. He's like, oh, but this is only for new deputies. This isn't for current people. And the guy's like, no, it's for everybody. And so Andy learns on Barney's 5th anniversary of becoming a deputy that Barney will no longer be eligible to be a deputy sheriff in Mayberry because of these qualifications that he does no longer match. And so he goes back with this news, and he's really bummed out, and he gets back, and they're all at the courthouse partying and having cake, and Barney gets this wristwatch as a gift. And so they're having a good time, but Andy kind of brings the mood down because he has to tell Barney eventually that he will no longer be able to be a deputy sheriff. And so this is obviously going to be a big worry in Barney's life. This is his means of making money and how he gets food on plate and how he keeps a roof over his head. And so this is going to be a big moment of worry in his life. And then they're talking about what they're going to do, and Aunt Bee is saying, I can fatten him up. I'll give him all this food. We're going to make him eat all this food, and we'll get him to the right weight. But even then, he won't be tall enough. And so, like I said, there's all this worry around this. And so Andy has this moment of realization that he knows this guy who had some sort of issue in his back, and he put this harness on his neck and like kind of looked like he's hanging himself a little bit. He's stretching out his back, and he remembers that guy telling him, I grew like half an inch taller. And so they get this contraption, and I should have put a picture of it up here because Barney looks hilarious in it. But he's stretching himself out, and he does this for like 5 days, for hours and hours and hours, and he eats all this food, and he still does not reach the right weight. He does actually get to the right height, but he still only gains half an inch after worrying about it so much and working for hours and hours and hours to become taller, and even then he only gains about an inch or so. And so to spoil the episode, if you haven't already seen it, it's been out for a while. Barney does eventually. They figure it out, and he wears this chain that's really heavy, and so he's all good. So don't be worried. He's still a deputy somewhere in Mayberry. But anyways, he's back to worrying. He's worried so much about his height and if he's going to be able to make it, and he does all this worrying, and he does not grow that much. They figure out a way to make him just a bit taller, but that goes back to Jesus' point, is how much worrying does it take to make you 18 or so inches taller? You can never make yourself 18 inches taller. And so that also brings up the point of do not worry about what you cannot control. There's things in life that we can't control, whether we like it or not. There's things that that we're not in charge of, we're not in control. Height being one of them. We can only be so tall. And there's also other things we're not in control of, like other people, right? We can only tell them so much about Jesus. We can only help them or talk to them so much, and some people are just so turned off to it or whatever. And there's only so much we can do. And so Jesus is saying, do not worry about the things you cannot control. Do not worry about the stuff that you don't have any control over, like height or like other people or like the weather or anything like that. Stuff we cannot actively control. Why should we worry about it? Because it's not going to do us any good. Worrying is actually, it's bad for your health. And so Jesus is making this point of, don't worry about it. Don't worry about what you cannot control. Don't worry about your height. Don't worry about anything else, because worrying cannot change it. And like I said earlier, worrying can't even change the stuff you do have control over, right? If you're hungry, worrying cannot make you not hungry or make you full. It cannot do that. And so there's no need to worry, and there's no point in worrying, because it only does bad and does not do us any good, especially when we worry about things which we cannot control. And then going on to verse 28 through 30, Jesus says, so why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. And yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Now if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? So Jesus questions our doubt, right? At the very end there, he says, O you of little faith. He questions our doubt because we see the lilies and the flowers of the world and in meadows and grass and everything. We see that, and we know, again, even more so than birds, lilies don't have like brains or whatever, so they don't know anything. They're just flowers. They're just there, and God still clothes them and takes care of them, and he still makes them pretty and dresses them up. And so he's questioning our doubt because he's saying, if God takes care of these little flowers, how much more can he take care of us? How much more will he take care of us? And he uses the word array, and the word array means to dress or decorate, especially in splendid or impressive attire. And so it's like this it's very impressive dressing. It's not just dressing up somewhat nice to go out to eat or whatever. Like, it's very impressive, like what kings and what royalty wears. That is what arraying is. And so he brings up a king, King Solomon, who was rich and wise and powerful. And I learned something interesting. I always knew he was super rich, and obviously he asked God to make him wise, and he's powerful because he's a king. But I did not realize how wealthy he was. So I was doing some research, and everything I found said that if he were alive today, and if he had his wealth today, he would be worth $2 to $3 trillion. And that just absolutely blew me away. Like, that's an insane amount of money. I don't know if you heard last week, I think it was, Elon Musk became the first ever trillionaire on our planet and in our planet's history, which is, crazy in its own right. But to know that everything we have today, in a time where there is more money than ever, in this time there's still someone from the Bible times, King Solomon, who was worth $2 to $3 trillion, and that absolutely blew me away. So to kind of put it into perspective, the difference between a million and a billion. So a million seconds is about 11 days, I think is what it is. And then a billion seconds is 42 years. That's the difference between a million and a billion. So I didn't even bother to look it up, the difference between a billion and a trillion. It is a very big difference. And to know that the richest person alive today, who owns, Tesla and SpaceX and has all this stuff, is still 2 to 3 times less, has less money than King Solomon. And so this really shows us that being worth $2 to $3 trillion, he could have whatever he wanted, whatever attire he wanted, whatever food he wanted, whatever he wanted to have to drink. He could have it all. He had power, so that alone would get him that. But then on top of that, this $2 to $3 trillion in gold and silver, he has all of this, and so he can have whatever he wants. He just has to say the word, and someone will bring it to him. And so all of this stuff, all of the stuff he can buy, all of the stuff he can put on himself, all of the stuff he can wear, and he still cannot be taken care of like God can take care of us. He cannot take care of himself the way God will take care of us. And the lilies even are still taken care of more than he was. And God provides for these lilies by making them grow. And so God will take care of us so much more, because think about for a second how he treats flowers, how he treats birds. Think about how he can treat us and how he will treat us, right? Like I said, how much more will God clothe you? And so that goes on to the next part in verse 30, where it says, "Now if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith?" So he's mentioning this, and so grass in this day, it would be dried out and it would be used to start up an oven or start up a fire. And so Jesus is making the point of, if God spends his time on the grass, and it's very conveniently timed. I mean, look out the window. He's doing it right now. It's raining outside. And so he's taking care of this grass. And in this day and age, in the Bible times, the grass would be used to start fires. So God spends his time on taking care of grass, when today it's just grass, and tomorrow it will be used and burnt up in a fire. So it would be like us today going out and buying clothes and then using it the very next day to start a fire, right? So if you went out and bought yourself a new pair of clothes and you took it through the washer, you dried it, you made sure it smelled good, you did all this stuff, and then the very next day you burned it. That is what God does for the grass, because today it's just grass, and tomorrow in these times it would be lit on fire to start up an oven and to start cooking or to start a fire of any kind. And so we know this, and we know how much God just takes care of the grass. And so how much more will he take care of you? And he clothes the grass. So how much more will he clothe us? And so that's something I think, I love how Jesus uses this example, because it's something we don't ever think about. We don't ever think about grass. It's just grass. We mow it. We might spray some stuff on it. But in the end of the day, it's just grass, and God still is the one who takes care of that. So how much more will he take care of us? And so Jesus says all of this, and then he goes on to say in verse 31, "Therefore do not worry." He says this. He's just listed all this stuff, how God takes care of the birds. God takes care of the grass. God takes care of the flowers and the lilies. He takes care of all this. Therefore, this is why we do not worry. We do not have to worry because he takes care of everything else, right? Do not worry about food, drink, clothing, or any worldly need. So my version, which is the New King James, says, "For after all these things the Gentiles seek, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things." So my NIV, because I use that every now and then, uses the word pagans. And I like that a little better because it really shows what it is. Gentiles in this day were just non-Jewish people, and they were pagan worshipers in this time. And so Jesus is using this as an example, saying, this is what pagans go after. Pagans go after food and drink and clothing and any other worldly need. These are what pagans go after. And so we stop and think for a minute that God designed us. God created you. He created me. He created the whole world, right? In Jeremiah, it says how he knows us before he formed us in our mother's womb. He knew us before our parents were even together or anything. And so he knows us, and he knew us from the beginning, and he still knows us today. And he designed us, and he forms us, he knits us together in our mother's womb. And he knows us, so intimately. And so we have to stop and think, do we really think God does not know that we need food and that we need water and we need clothing? Of course he knows all of these things. He's the one that made us. He's the one that designed us to be this way. And so God knows all of our needs, and this is why we do not worry. We don't worry because he's the one who created it all. He created us. And so he knows our needs. And so this is where I want to also look at the audience. So it started out as just the disciples at first, and then a crowd came to the mount. And so it started off as just the disciples, but then came some laborers, farmers, and just common Jewish people. And so these are the people who would need clothing and food and water more than others because they are the people who are on the lower part of the totem pole when it comes to economic and how well off they are. So, when I first read this, I kind of thought maybe it's just don't seek after things that you already have. Don't seek after an abundance of things. And it made me think about, there's this, I use this term very loosely, a quote-unquote pastor out in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he wears these crazy, extravagant outfits on stage. And when he's, again, quote-unquote preaching, he preaches a prosperity gospel. But anyways, he wears these clothing, and there's this account that I've seen before that will total up the cost of his outfits. And I've seen before it's been upwards of $5,000, $6,000. And he'll be wearing a $2,000 pair of shoes, $3,000 shirt, $2,000 pair of pants. I mean, just ridiculous what this guy is wearing. And it doesn't even look good at all. And so if you're going to spend that type of money on clothing, might as well look normal. But anyways, so I thought for a second, I was like, maybe this is what he's talking about. Don't spend all this crazy amount of money on clothing that, is just, at the end of the day, just clothing. And like I said, he wears these crazy outfits that are worth thousands and thousands of dollars, and you can think, how many people could he feed by just, selling his shirt and buying a cheaper one? But that's not the point of this particular passage. And I realized that because, again, I remembered who Jesus is speaking to. He's speaking to people who are poor, who are less well off than others. And so he's telling people who would be seeking food and seeking water and seeking clothing more than others, he's telling them to not seek these things. He's telling them to not worry about the things that they don't have. This isn't Jesus saying, don't worry about the things you already have. No, he's telling the people who don't have these things to not worry about the things that they don't have. And so it can be a little confusing at first, but then that is when we remember and we realize and we need to know that God is our perfect Father in heaven, and God knows our needs. When we are hungry, he knows that we're hungry. And when we are cold, he knows we're cold. And when we're thirsty, he knows we're thirsty. And so this also made me think, well, what about people who are currently struggling or homeless or don't necessarily know where their next meal is coming from? But then we have to remember that Jesus is not always talking about now. He's not always talking about, believe in God, seek God, and you're going to instantly get these things. He does not always say that. And so God provides for us sometimes now. A lot of us are blessed, and the majority of people here are all blessed, and even in our country are blessed to live in this country, and we live in a land of abundance and all this things. And so he blesses us now, of course, and we know the blessings that we have here on earth, but we also have a promise and a guarantee of blessings in heaven. And so God, like it says, is our perfect Father in heaven. A good father knows what his children need. And so, and a good worldly father, an earthly father, will work tirelessly to get his children what they need. And obviously God does not have to, get up and work and go through a work day. He doesn't have to do a 9 to 5. He, doesn't have to do these things, but he still will give us what we need, and he will take care of us. If not now, then he will do it in heaven. And that is what we have to remember, right? There might be some of us here this morning who have come from actual broken homes, as in, missing a parent, maybe there's abusive or alcohol or something like that. But in a way, we all sort of come from a broken home because we live here on earth, and this earth is a broken planet, and it's a world of sin, and everything there's so much wrong in this world. There's so much good, but also we have to remember that there's a lot of brokenness and a lot of sin in our world today. And so we have to remember that this is where, we talked about last week, laying up treasures in heaven. This is where the thieves break in and steal. This is where people are hungry and people are sick and people are tired and worried. This is where all of that happens. And so this raises the question of, so what should we seek? And this is, of course, we should seek God and his kingdom and his righteousness. Because his kingdom is where there is no sin. There's no hunger, there's no thirst, there's no brokenness. If you come from an actual broken family home, or you're just from here on earth, there's brokenness all around us. But God provides the place, and where God is the place where there is no sin, there's no hunger, there's no thirsting, and overall there is no suffering. And so we must seek out his kingdom, and we must seek him out first, because this is where we will get to experience no hunger and no sin and no stealing. This is where we will get to experience that, is of course in heaven. And so we must also seek to live like Jesus, seek to help those who are currently in need, and we can be helped when we are in need of taken care of, and we will be taken care of. And so this is what we have to remember, is we must seek to live out these things and to live like Jesus and to seek God and his kingdom and his righteousness, because that is where the perfect home for us is, and that is where the perfect home that Jesus has left to prepare for us, that is where it is, and that is where the world will be perfect. Heaven is a perfect place, and we can go there when we seek him and we seek his righteousness. And this is what, we remember, like I mentioned, some of this stuff is temporary. All the blessings we have right now are temporary, but God is promising a permanent blessing for us. And so we must also seek to live like this today. In verse 34 it says, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." And so we have to remember that tomorrow may never come, right? The Bible says that nobody knows the day or the hour when the Son of Man shall return. So we don't know. It could be in 10 minutes, it could be in 10 years, it could be in 100 years. We don't know. But we must prepare today like it's going to happen today. And so that is why in verse 34 he says, "Do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself." There's enough to worry about tomorrow, but we have to focus on the here and the now, because now is the only thing that's guaranteed. And today and has its own trouble, and it's sufficient, like it says there in verse 34, sufficient for the day is its own trouble. There's enough to worry about today. There's enough to focus on today. There's enough people to help today. And so we should not worry about tomorrow and worry about what we're going to do, where we're going to eat at, what we're going to wear. We should not worry about these things, because these things are not guaranteed. And so we have to remember that, and that's what verse 34 is saying, is that there's enough. There's enough to worry about today, and there'll be plenty to worry about tomorrow. So that's why we have to start living like him today. And if you are ready to start living like him today and start following his commands, and you are ready to be baptized, to become a Christian, and ready to commit yourself to Christ, please come forward as we stand and as we sing.
What can wash away my sin? Nothing.